We will reconvene the public meeting of the Board of Curators. And the first item on the agenda is always a very important part of our board meetings, and that is to welcome Dr. Choi and to let him present his president's report. Dr. Choi.
Thank you, Chairman Graham. Let me begin by sharing with you how excited I am about the future of the university. Last night, we had a special event to recognize the curators, professors, as well as awardees for the President's very important awards for outreach, research, and teaching. And it reinforced in me why I am so excited. We have all of the elements in place. Obviously, we have outstanding faculty and staff and administrators, but also very talented students. And on top of that, we also have many academic leaders who are making the difficult but necessary decisions to strengthen the University of Missouri. So I'm very proud of that. Let me start off by sharing with you the difficult decisions that they've made and the individuals who participated in what I would say was probably 2 to 3 months of the most challenging discussions that we've had, because these discussions affected people. And obviously the chancellors, the provost, CFOs, as well as the general officers, and the Board of Curators for their support for us to come up with a plan to reduce our budget by about $100 million. And also the community support through your input has been very instrumental. So to give you a sense of the magnitude of the heavy lift that everyone contributed to, I would like to ask you to take a look at this slide. And the budget target for this year, meaning fiscal year 18, which begins in about a week from now, is for us to have a budget target of $101 million throughout the University of Missouri system. And as you can see, this is broken out by the campuses as well as the system. But $101 million is not the budget cut to meet the budget deficit. Of the $101 million, almost $40 million of that is for reallocation into strategic initiatives. Because we said throughout this process, we are going to strengthen the universities in areas that will bring us greater prestige and also benefit to the citizens of Missouri. And the difficult part of all of this is the separation of individuals. And throughout the system, we had over 500. You're seeing 474, but there are members of the staff who work in auxiliary programs like athletics, facilities, dining services that are not included in the operating budget. And about half of these positions are unfilled positions that would not be replaced, but half of them had incumbents. And as many of you recognize, that was a very difficult period in forming very talented and dedicated staff and faculty members and administrators that we are no longer able to support their position. But with the staff members, we have what is a very innovative program called the Transition Assistance Program that provides them that ability to be able to look for another job, try to get training during that period. For the NTT faculty members this year, our Human Resources Vice President, Jill Pollack, working with the chancellors and HR directors, they're going to come up with a plan for a temporary transition program for NTT faculty members who have been separated this year. And going forward, we will evaluate how to include long-serving NTT faculty members into our transition assistance program. Because of the budget cuts, we've also realized some very disturbing trends at the university. The heart of any great university really lies in the strength of the faculty. And as you can see from this slide, the number of faculty members who are on the tenure track at all of our campuses except for S&T, have decreased over the years. And the reason for this is because of the budget situation, and in some cases, like in Mizzou, because of dramatic falls in enrollment. But this is not a trend that we can continue. We need to reverse this. I believe that this year is an inflection point for the University of Missouri system, that we have to be strategic and make investments in faculty members who are going to contribute to the research, teaching, and outreach that will bring greater prestige to the university. So going forward, with the system and the chancellor, with the system and the campuses, we plan to continue to make strategic investments. And some of the areas, this is not an exhaustive list, but some of the key areas where we want to make investments include effective enrollment strategies. That's going to be key. As many of you heard from Pelham and Morris, the MU team is developing some very innovative, progressive approaches to market, but also at the same time develop programs that adds to retention, graduation rate, and student success. And this is something that we will be expecting all of the campuses to implement. We also have to have more open source textbooks. The level of interest that we have from students and faculty members for this has been tremendous. And just to give you a sense of the magnitude of this type of project, on an annual basis, students typically spend about $1,200 on textbooks. If we can reduce that cost by 50% or 100% by using just free open source material, that represents a savings of $1,200 per year. This year, the University of Missouri system increased tuition by 2.1%. That 2.1% increase is $200. And so you could see the return on investment by making an investment in open source textbooks. We also need to have more collaboration throughout the system when it comes to distance learning, to have a seamless platform for which students from UMKC can log on to see what courses are available throughout the system that is cross-linked to the courses that they need for graduation. And there will be sharing of revenue from the departments and the units that are offering the distance learning courses, as well as where the students reside. We have to be thinking more about how do we approach this as a system, because each campus has a successful distance learning program. The fact of the matter right now is that we are not integrated. Students will have to log on to 4 different sites and get permission to take those courses. We don't need to do it that way. In terms of research and creative works, we need to continue to make investments in facilities, equipment, but also faculty members. The quality of our programs demands that we go out and attract the best faculty members who are members of the National Academies, Institute of Medicine, AAAS fellows, NEH fellows into our programs. And the system will provide matching funding for this type of program. We're going to be launching that in the fall term. Last but not least, our biggest supporter is the state of Missouri. And we need to engage throughout the state, not where you just see where our campuses are located. And if you look at this slide was provided by Cuba Plain from Ryan Rapp's team. It shows where currently our 50,000 students from Missouri call home. And if you look at some of the counties near Kansas City, within the counties, you see the numbers. Those are the students, undergraduate students, who reside from those counties. And I believe you have a handout. In your handout, you could probably read a little bit better. On the Kansas City side, we have Platte, Clay, Jackson, and Cass, and a little bit more south in Springfield. Those are the largest counties with the largest enrollment of University of Missouri students. On the St. Louis side, St. Charles, St. Louis City, and Jefferson. And we also have a strong presence in Boone County for students that are recruited to the University of Missouri system. But look at counties like Pemiscot or Cape Girardeau or Atchison, how many students actually come to the University of Missouri? Partly, we have not been proactive in recruiting students from these areas. If you look at the bottom part of the map over here, these are counties in which Arkansas is really aggressively recruiting these students. That's why the programs like land grant scholarships, land grant honors, and the National Merit finalist and semifinalist scholarships for Missouri residents will be key. Palama mentioned yesterday that he will be making a visit to every single high school in the state. I recommend all of the campuses to visit every single high school in the state, but not only with counselors, but with faculty, with students, with curators if they're available, but also with administrators to talk about the wonderful programs that we have, whether it's a 6-year MD program or the wonderful program in biomedical engineering here on this campus, or criminal justice at UMSL. These are the type of things that we need to do. Now, beyond this, I also have a slide of where our Pell Grant eligible students are coming from to all of our system. And once again, you can see that we are heavily focused in Kansas City, Columbia, Springfield, and St. Louis. But this is a big state. And as the state's land grant institution, we need to demonstrate to each county and citizens in those counties that we care about their learning opportunities. And for us to be able to offer distance learning through the School of Educations so that we can offer AP credit courses or dual enrollment courses using distance learning through our extension offices and also through MoreNet throughout the state, we can develop the type of buy-in and support from citizens of this state. Let me now end with another very important opportunity for the university, and that is when it comes to workforce development and economic development. And this is a slide that comes from an economics institute that measures distressed communities based on various factors, including adults who are not working, level of poverty, changes in enrollment, and housing vacancy, and high school degrees that are attained in those counties. And if you look at this slide, red or garnet in this case, not garnet, it looks more garnet, yeah, is distressed. Green is in a very productive, proactive community. Look at where Missouri is. With Missouri, you find that between the I-70 corridors, there are many communities that are doing well on this distress level slide. But look at north part of I-70 and south part of I-70, how much red you see. As the state's land grant institution, we have a responsibility to take our research and education and make a difference in the communities. And that's why Marshall Stewart, that's why the K through 12 investments that we have throughout the state and our alumni network are going to be so important for us to carry our message, but also carry our programs that says University of Missouri cares about every single community in this state. So that's going to be a shift in culture that takes us out of the silos of our campuses and into the communities. And that's going to be a challenge that we're going to have for all of the chancellors, provosts, and vice chancellors and vice provosts as well. So with that, let me end my presentation and entertain any comments or questions. Yes. Curator Chapman?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Choi. Good presentation. I was just doing a little research last night, and I saw that Mizzou, we've already talked about this, is one of 6 public universities with a law school, med school, vet school on the same campus. Puts us in pretty elite crowd right there. We also have the nuclear reactor, which also makes us unique. We have the largest research reactor of any university. We looked at some slides yesterday showing potentially a $250 million ask for capital improvements. Yet, we haven't talked about the dollar figure we're going to invest in faculty. Looks like we've already got world-class facilities based on some of the data that I've seen. How are you going to balance, the investment in world-class faculty with this, the investments that we propose to make in capital improvements? Which do you think, should maybe be given a heavier weight in this analysis? And just what are your thoughts?
Thank you. That's a wonderful question. And we're facing a situation where we have to move forward on both fronts. There are some good facilities within our campuses, but the great majority of our facilities, as you saw from the presentation from Gary Ward, have a deferred maintenance cost and condition that says that we need to tear down those buildings. In some of these buildings, we have world-class faculty members working in them, like Professor Chen down at Fisher Delta Center, that are working in substandard space. But in order to attract and retain a person like Professor Chen, we need to provide that great space, because other universities will be recruiting these individuals and guaranteeing them space in either a new or a renovated space. So that's going to be key. And as you saw from the slides, we are down a significant number of faculty members. In order to elevate our stature as public research universities, we need to make investments as well in faculty hiring, but strategic cluster faculty hiring. And they accomplished this in the School of Medicine. With Patrick Delafontaine, he hired 3 clinician scientist chairs. And these faculty members are not only clinicians, but they do basic science research. And the goal there is to make these types of investments. Now, without the renovated space that they had on hand, they would not have been able to recruit these individuals. So going forward, with all of the reallocations that we have within the system and the expected reallocations within the campuses, we're going to be leveraging those 2 resources to hire very high-profile faculty members who are National Academy members and so forth. So where we have space available, given the type of research that the individuals will be performing, we're going to continue to hire. But when it comes to areas like translational precision medicine, we are currently out of space for the high-profile wet lab type of experiments with the vivarium that can support that research. And so we're going to have to move in parallel. But with the building program, we are planning to hire more faculty. In fact, at Mizzou, they have plans to hire 70 tenure-track faculty members this year. And so we have to really focus on hiring very high-quality individuals. Any other comments or questions? Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Choi. Just a question. How this map is really interesting, and how are we going to make the state of Missouri maybe more green? And what is the University of Missouri doing to recruit industry and letting people know of all the great things that we have going on here to get more businesses to establish themselves in the state of Missouri?
Excellent. That's an excellent point. And we have to ask ourselves as a university, what are ways that we can contribute? Obviously, we can contribute through workforce development. Major companies are going to go where the talent resides. And we also have to make investments in the research laboratories as well as core equipment and faculty members that will attract industry partners who will come to the university, or for university faculty members to go to the industries to solve their most pressing problems. And we have to have a very proactive approach of saying, we have faculty members and students who contribute in various areas of technology and engineering, but it's up to our research office and economic development offices, which I'm going to be challenging them to do, to want to make those connections. We can't wait on our offices and say, we're the University of Missouri. If you want to come work with us, come to Rolla, come to Columbia. We have to be proactive. We also have to work with the state to try to recruit industries into this region. In a few weeks, we're going to be meeting with an international IT company with 170,000 employees worldwide to establish a very important analytics partnership. And they are currently based in India and in England. But if we can attract them here and we help solve some of their most important problems, but at the same time they have access to our best students, that'll be a winning partnership. Another thing that's very important is we can't lose sight of the importance of innovation. How does a university transform the environment? Well, there are case studies, like in Route 128 out of Boston or in Silicon Valley. Without the universities that were there contributing to economic development, these miracles would not have happened. And we have Bill Turpin, we have Jim Neiman, we have Mark McIntosh in this campus. At Kansas City, we have Maria Meyer. And in each of our campuses, we have a strong initiative. In fact, at S&T, we recognize Bonnie Bachman, a faculty member there, for her many contributions. I want to make creativity, innovation, and entrepreneurship a key coordinating theme for all of our campuses. And it's not going to happen overnight. We have to demonstrate as a university that we are good partners, that we want a winning partnership. We're not going to go to industry partners and ask for donations. It's going to be a partnership that we're going to be seeking. So other universities like University of Illinois, University of Michigan, Texas, Austin, they have done this very effectively. But just like fundraising, they started it much earlier than we did. But we can also learn from their mistakes and their successes. John, thank you.
So addressing what's north and south of the I-70 corridor, which is basically outstate Missouri, I'd like to ask your thoughts about our extension service. We might even call it our fifth campus, because it addresses, not that it isn't in the metropolitan communities, but it outreaches. And in particular, I know that you're aware that there's an effort going on now to try to bring broadband throughout Missouri. In fact, you have an alum that used to be with one of the major engineering companies that's involved in that, and I understand that Governor Greitens has an initiative.
That's right.
What do you see as the potential there for the university's involvement through extension and being involved in Governor Greitens' broadband program for helping to go from red to, what'd you call it, garnet or some other color?
Red to garnet. Garnet is positive. I'm going to go to that spectrum.
Right. So
Thank
what are your
you,
thoughts about that?
John. So my thoughts about that really centers on our ability to leverage extension to make the University of Missouri more valuable to the citizens. And the University Extension Program has been a very successful program, but I want to see it more integrated, not just with Mizzou's campus, but all 4 campuses, because of where the populations lie. And the opportunity through the broadband initiative is a very important one, but we have to ask ourselves, what do we want to do with broadband? I think the things that we can do with broadband is to offer distance learning courses, certificates, retraining of laid off workers in these regions, as well as telemedicine, an opportunity that we can have because we have a very strong rural medicine component, and I believe UMKC is leading an effort collaborating with your surrounding counties as well. So telemedicine can be a very important objective. But now we have to think about what extension represented, or what extension can represent going into the future. Extension was about going from agricultural to industrial. Now it's industrial. We're past that stage into information. And how do we use that through the broadband initiative to bring more value through the extension offices? But at the same time, we, members of the university community, have to understand what the extension members are doing so we can leverage it. And they also have to know what the rest of the university is doing to leverage the university into the communities. But I'm really happy that we have the right leader in extension, Marshall Stewart. He's going to be outstanding. In fact, he's going to participate in our curators retreat as part of the engagement and outreach activity throughout the state of Missouri. And so you'll see some important changes come forward. In fact, from my office, Gary Allen is leading that effort through MoreNet, working with Extension and the governor's office to expand broadband out into these communities. MoreNet has a connection, fiber optic connection, to almost every single K through 12 school in this state.
I'll mention that in just.
You will? Okay. I don't want to steal your thunder. Thank you. Yes. Thank you. And Curator Lehman.
Yes, President Choi, I appreciate your presentation, and I want to speak a little bit about what you just mentioned. And I look at it like the students are that's who we're working for. And, you know, if we have students here at Mizzou that at some point go back to Kansas City or St. Louis, we need to make it easy on them to enroll at UMKC or UMSL instead of, you know, having to jump through all the hoops. Absolutely. I mean, we need to keep them in our system. Also, going back to the students, I want to look at page 3 and 4, because this is, you know, 3 talks about the cuts, and, you know, I'm trying to kind of look at those across the different areas. And then on page 4, it talks about the faculty, that obviously the number of faculty have been declining at MU here for a while. One thing that would be helpful to me is kind of the ratio to students, whether it's administrators to students, faculty to students, staff to students. You know what I mean? That's right. That would help me visualize.
That's right.
You know, are we growing where we need to grow? Because you just mentioned hiring more faculty.
Sure.
You know, that's wonderful. But are we over in a lot of areas? You know, just try to right size.
You're right about that, and that's important for us to provide that for the curators. Just to give you a back-of-the-envelope calculation, at Mizzou, they probably have about 22,000 undergraduate students, and they're at 983 or 1,000. So that's a student-to-faculty ratio for full-time undergraduate students to full-time tenure-track faculty of over 22. Rutgers has student-to-faculty ratio of 12. They do much better than Mizzou does in terms of retention rate and graduation rate. So not only do we want to grow research by hiring faculty, we need to hire the faculty members to be able to serve as mentors, advisors, and beyond the classroom support so they can be more successful. But we will provide that data for you by the next curators meeting.
Thank you.
So comparisons, and comparisons with our peers and aspirants. One of the things that we do notice is that much of the data that's provided by the universities are self-reported, just like U.S. News and World Report. So and many cases, we don't use the same definition. In fact, we found that we don't use the same definition across the 4 campuses, so it's hard to get to the right data. But we are going to clean that up. And you mentioned another very important point. When a student from Kansas City goes back home to St. Louis and wants to do an internship in St. Louis and take courses at UMSL, we don't want that student to have to go through hoops by registering as an UMSL student. I don't know if that's the way it's done, and then registering and then having that course transfer back to the home campus. It should be seamless. It should be seamless. So thank you.
Any other questions of Dr. Choi?
President Choi, backing up on your business development with the campuses, companies, economic development, et cetera. I recall a couple years ago down in Rolla, they gave us quite an extensive little spiel about how companies there are actually have their own rooms within a part of the building and have done, it seems like, a much better job of reaching out to industry than we have on the Mizzou campus or in Kansas City, St. Louis. Can we use some of that going forward to help us? Because, you know, Rolla's ranked very, very high, and there are people coming out of there. We had the comment made that companies will come in there and they'll say, look, whether you're a STEM student or whatever, if you graduate from S&T, we want to hire you. And the average wage of hiring there for at least the STEM people was $72,000, $75,000 a year, which is very, very good and ranks right up with MIT and Caltech and all the others. it seems like we need to somehow transpose that into the other campuses, and maybe that's a very small part of it, but it seems like that might be one element that we could make some progress there.
That's a very big part. SNT does a wonderful job working with industries, not only providing them space through their tech park where they can locate their research labs to work with faculty, but also use that facility as internship space for students. On top of that, SNT has what's called the NSF IUCRC, which is an industry university research center in which industry partners pay a consortium fee to get access to the research in specific areas. It may be in materials, but they're going to be industry partners that are in non-competitive spaces, like an aerospace company, biomedical company. But beyond that, they can also have directed research, but it's a way to engage industry partners. And I believe SNT has 5 separate IUCRCs, which is one of the highest in the country. So we should learn from those lessons and best practices and then take it to the other campuses. In areas that don't compete, we don't want to compete, but in areas that are non-competitive, but we have the proposal and the best practices that were developed in one campus, we should leverage it. So the answer to your question is yes. And by the way, that type of innovation spaces for industry partners is occurring here, Kansas City, and in St. Louis. It's happened at Cortex with Ameren. So it's happening. We just have to coordinate more of that activity.
Dr. Choi, I have a question. Your presentation is student-focused, and an issue we haven't talked about a lot is an issue that faces many, many students, and that is student debt on graduation. And what role does the university have, or what role can the university play in helping to minimize the debt that a student has upon graduation? Because in many instances, that even affects their opportunity to take the position that they want to work in because they can't repay their loan.
We have a tremendous responsibility to address student debt. And there are many ways that we can help to reduce student debt. And as I've stated on many occasions, when parents look at or evaluate universities, the first thing that they look at is the tuition. What is the tuition? But we have to look beyond the tuition. It's the discount rate, need-based, merit-based scholarships. It's also Pell Grants that are available, work studies that are available. But more important than that is trying to graduate students on a timely basis. Throughout the system, I believe that the highest graduation rate in 4 years is about 50%. So 50% of our students who we bring in as students who have the capability and the academic credentials to succeed, and that we're saying to them, here's a path for you to go forward and graduate in 4 years, only 1 in 2 graduates in 4 years. So the additional years that they stay within the university is additional years in which they're not contributing by having a job that pays them well. And they're racking up more debt. So graduation rate, retention and graduation rate is something we really have to focus on. At a university like the University of Missouri and Columbia as the AAU institution, if we compare it to other universities, we should be graduating students in 4 years at a rate of 70%. But currently, our 6-year graduation rate is at 69%. So we have some work to do. And this is where student affairs, academic affairs have to work very collaboratively to engage the students in a holistic manner. Use the residence halls and living and learning communities to provide more tutoring, peer-to-peer mentoring. These are programs that have been launched by other universities and have been very successful. On top of that, we have to continue to seek resources for open source textbooks. If we had a program, which I would love to see, and I'm going to challenge all of the chancellors who are here, to say, let's have the first year of all of our programs use open source textbooks, to be able to tell students, instead of your cost for textbooks being $1,200 per year, it'll be $300 per year, or $0 because they're all available for download. Not only does that share our commitment to affordability, it's a wonderful recruitment tool. And so those are things that we have to look at. Thank you, Marcy.
Thank you. Dr. Choi, thank you very much for your presentation. And next item on the agenda is Gary Allen, who will present his IT report. Gary?
Thank you, Chairman Graham. This is the meeting where I traditionally provide an annual report on the IT activities within the system. So we'll get underway. First, since I haven't been given the privilege of orienting some of the newer curators, I thought I would give you just a little bit of background. Some of this should be obvious, but it's important to recognize the extent to which IT essentially touches everything the university does. We serve all of its internal and external constituents across just about every operation and process that is in place within the university. We also need to appreciate the extent to which technology continues to be in churn and the acceleration with which change is occurring in this space. I put some trends up. This is a slide I actually used last year, and I went back and looked at it, and it's probably just more true than it was then. Things are continuing to happen at a pace that makes it difficult to keep up. And these are areas, some of these areas are areas of controversy currently because we're changing our views of how to view things like security and privacy in the context of a fully digitized environment. Security, privacy, compliance, those are key issues for anything that happens inside the university. Our biggest threat, just as one single point of reference, our biggest threat in terms of security intrusions as a research-oriented university represents the intellectual property management and intellectual property that is produced by our researchers. We also live in a particular context where we're publicly funded and therefore open to the public. We have the extremes of support requirements in our IT systems because we need to be open and accessible to the public in general, but we also have the extreme security requirements associated with things like classified research. As technology becomes more and more important, the university, like all operations and enterprises, have an ever-increasing need to standardize and automate processes. This is actually somewhat perversely from the seat that I sit in. The expectations for technology delivery and the ability to do work becomes even more critical in times when you're in budget constraints, because frequently those budget constraints result in the reduction of the human workforce, and people are trying to do more with less through the application of technology. In that context, I do need to report that we are, like a lot of other sectors, suffering staffing challenges on all of the business units in the system due to the market competition for talent in those spaces. Particular areas in particular would include things like security analysts, system administrators, but it's a constant effort that we undertake with HR to try to continue to find ways to adequately compensate our workforce. This map gives you an indication of the extent to which technology is key to the operations of the entirety of the system. We obviously have the 4 campuses there, each one of which, by the way, has its own IT organization that's local to that campus. There's also an IT organization in the Academic Medical Center here on the Columbia campus. But in addition to that, we connect research parks, research stations, business incubators, development centers. MoreNet sites are highlighted here in the light blue color. President Choi mentioned the telehealth network that's also here and is part of the broader network that the university supports. And then the extension centers, which support all of the counties inside of the state of Missouri. And this slide will kind of highlight some of the issues that were brought up in the last discussion. There's several things I wanted to point out here. First of all, this is the route map for the core backbone, the fiber optic backbone that Mornet supports. This piece of the network was actually deployed about 10 years ago or so. And it provides direct connectivity among the campuses to each other in a redundant ring, so we have failover capacity on the backbone. It also supports, or has been supporting traditionally, all of the other 700 or so clients that are supported by and helped by Mornet. That includes more than 500 K-12 school districts, public libraries, other higher eds in the state. A few years ago, Mornet formed a public-private partnership, based in part on what you see here in the pink shading. That was an old census that was done, a study of internet accessibility across the country, done by the NTIA in the late 2000s and early 2010s timeframe. And at that time, bandwidth necessary to be classified as being served appropriately by the internet was around probably 4 megabits per second on a download, 1 megabit per second up. Mornet went into a public-private partnership to provide support to some of the least served areas of the state based on that census, and added 3,000 route miles of fiber and to connect additional clients down in that part of the state. Now, in the context of what's going on now with the broadband initiative, the blue shading represents areas that have been designated by the FCC recently as being eligible for the application of Connect America funds, which are due to be reverse auctioned in the near-term future. And because of that, and the recognition of the nature, going back to the underserved areas and the lack of progressive economies in a large part of our state, the governor has enabled a conference that's going to be held on the 19th of July. It actually started with a conversation between Marshall Stewart and the Farm Bureau and the Department of Agriculture, who's been leading the way. And we have created an environment that's allowed us to plan for a stakeholder forum for broadband generally that will take place in Jeff City on the 19th of July, and the governor himself will be there speaking to that. It includes the telcos, the electric co-ops, the big carriers, people from economic development, the K-12 community, the Missouri Hospital Association is going to be represented. So they're getting together to discuss the opportunities that Missouri might have to apply some funding to improve our stature right now in terms of broadband access across the entirety of the state. Moving from the state to the region, you need to be aware that we are key in connecting a large block of Midwestern states to the Internet 2 higher education backbone. So the Great Plains Network, which is a gigapop that connects the states that are designated here, was one of the first connectors to Internet 2, and it is actually operated by Mornet staff. It is a fiscal entity of the university. It operates as we help manage their finances for them, but that's been in place for about 15 years, and it represents opportunities that we're already taking advantage of in terms of collaborations across those institutions designated in things like research computing and high bandwidth networking. This is the broader Internet 2 network map. Again, this is a committed network to higher ed and affiliate members from both the corporate and federal sections. And it provides the major research and education backbone for the United States.
Can I interrupt you just?
Sure, absolutely.
Just to point out that that goes around Kansas.
It goes what?
Goes around Kansas.
Oh, those lines are not meant to be taken literally.
Oh, darn it.
There is a connection, but I couldn't tell you exactly where the fiber is laid based on this based on this map. So with that little bit of background, I wanted to give you just a little bit of insight about what we've been involved with, cover some areas of activity that kind of give you some understanding of the kind of things that we've been doing. This is not intended to be comprehensive by any means, but it will give you a sense of the extent to which we are increasingly developing technology expertise which will serve the university well for years to come. First, there's a unified communications project. We're converting all the telephony in the Boone County geography for both system and Columbia campus to voice over IP. It'll also include direct connectivity to your computer, so you'll have soft phones and those kinds of things, follow you anywhere kinds of connectivity. Our primary focus has been on getting those systems in place for the medical center, and that's why you see the priority of the accomplishments that are listed there at the top. But it will be completed across the entirety of all of the system properties in Boone County by the end of next calendar year. We're replacing our video and web conferencing in order to establish better means to connect our different campuses with one another. We have replaced the ID transaction system, which will now allow proximity cards to be used for systems ancillary in the auxiliaries and also in places like the residence halls. We're currently evaluating a shared service in this space with S&T. We've replaced our knowledge base. We've moved to the cloud, finally, after having the ability to negotiate some reasonable contracts with some of the big carriers. We're being able to move some of our on-campus premise-based solutions to cloud solutions that still fit inside of our legal guidelines and security guidelines. Other things, updating our fax system, updating our security scan systems. We've developed a new system status page that's system-wide for any outages that we have. Increasing and changing the modality of our training offerings, and policies at the core of IT management are being upgraded and to keep in line with best practices. We've reached economies of scale in a lot of places as it relates to core infrastructure, and a few of those are called out here. Down at the bottom, there's some notes about storage. So we have now the ability to provide data storage at rates that are cheaper than the biggest of the big. So we're cheaper per unit of data than Azure or Amazon. And that's based upon the fact that we have reached economies of scale both within the Columbia geography. S&T is taking part in this as well. It is a direct incentive to departments that have previously desired to keep local data storage within their department or college. They are now migrating at a very high rate to their benefit and to ours, because it not only saves the university money, but it increases and improves our security profile. Speaking of security, we this year attained attestation of compliance with the payment card industry standards, which were upgraded recently. We're improving access restrictions on people who need access to Social Security numbers. We've re-implemented an identity management system, which was about 10 years old, so we've put a new one in place this year. We're moving all of our products and services to two-factor authentication, so you'll have to have both a password and a PIN number at the time of login to reduce security intrusions. And we're adding those tools sequentially into various service offerings as we roll them out. I want to spend a little bit of time giving you an update on where we are with the big ERP systems, the enterprise resource planning systems. So the finance system was upgraded to its current version in the spring of 2015, and then we updated it again last spring. This year, we completed the items that are shown at the top there. Most of those, or a large number of them at least, represent improvements in our supply chain operations, and a lot of that is tied to the operations inside the healthcare system. We also did routine kinds of things like updates for tax reporting and whatnot. We're currently working on improving our access request system, which is again tied to our security protocols. We're working closely with Extension as they develop a communications platform that they're going to use for their engagement with the rest of the state. We're an active partner in that group. In the HR payroll space, we upgraded HR. We are in the process of upgrading HR, a project that started last fall after we had evaluated the opportunities to perhaps go to the cloud. We opted not to for reasons related to both functionality and price. So we are in the midst of an implementation of a new version of HR that will go live the 1st of August. We're putting two-factor in front of it as well, you'll see. And then the other things that are just things that have to be done every year are continuing to be rolled out even as the timeline for the overall upgrade continues. Our student enterprise application actually serves two major groups. One is the students themselves, obviously, and I'll talk a fair bit about that. The other one is the development offices, because they derive their input, the information that they keep on alumni and donors comes originally from the student system. So we've done a number of upgrades to the development system, which is a product called Advance. We upgraded it all outright this past year, and we've done a few minor upgrades this year as well, giving them greater functionality and easier access through things like a portal. This mod request system that we've set up is part of a long-term strategy that we've gotten to approach the campuses in a way that allows them to easily find common means to do similar tasks. So I want to spend a bit of time on that before I'm through with this. We also have replaced and upgraded our digital document management for long-term document storage. We've gone mobile as much as we can in key areas, like, for example, in our ticketing system, which allows more facile handling of issues with our technical staff. We do have a common ticketing system across the entire campus for the IT space, and we're working currently with HR to see if we can fit one that would encompass both HR needs as well as IT needs. Upgraded the risk management system. Here's where the rubber hits the road in terms of student services and teaching and learning. We've been working jointly with Academic Affairs since about 2013, 2014, in what we refer to as a comprehensive retention initiative. And what you see here are things that are key to those overall efforts, specific different niche applications that have been developed specifically to meet certain business processes within the student retention space, a degree audit tool, an academic mapping planner, which allows a student to project their course needs out over the course of their entire curriculum with the university. Customer relationship management systems, which are involved with both the initial contacts, the recruiting, and the retention of students to become enrolled. At Dr. Choi's request, we began just a short time ago to deploy a nationally available online application called the Common App. It's currently used in the US by more than 600 institutions. We had pretty tight timelines on that, but we will be ready for that to go live the 1st of August. Section Scheduler is a product that will allow us to take better use of take better advantage of our facilities in terms of scheduling classes in particular locations across the campus to make it more logistically feasible. And then I wanted to mention this SIS ERP task force. We did a review of all of the ERP environments several years ago, and one of the areas that we knew we had trouble that was on the way was the complexity associated with our student system, student information system. So we started a task force, again jointly between IT and Academic Affairs under the leadership of the provost, and had a task force with representatives from all 4 of the campuses come together over the course of the last year on a regular basis.
You have 3 minutes.
Okay. 3 minutes. They have identified about 500 processes that are currently being rationalized in terms of how we can do things the same way as opposed to differently. That report is due from that group on August the 1st. Research computing, we've upgraded our computing resources, both data storage and computing power. We've added new research connections. We are actively participating in national collaborations with NSF-funded campuses with this Campus Research Computing Consortium. We are developing a statewide cyber infrastructure sharing initiative with other universities within the state. There are campus updates at the end of your packets that will give you some more detail about things that have gone on local campuses, but in respect of time, I will stop.
Any questions of Gary? And Gary, the handout is very informative, so it's
Yes.
going to be very helpful. Any questions?
Yes.
I have a quick, if you don't mind. Back on page 3, you mentioned you're having success getting people to migrate, I believe you said to the cloud, and then a little bit later, you mentioned I think you, and I may have this wrong, I thought you mentioned in a different area that they decided not to go to the cloud. So I'm trying to, if you could clarify that.
Yes,
And which cloud vendor do you use? Is it AWS or Azure? And kind of what percentage of all this is in the cloud?
It's a relatively small percentage, but it's growing rapidly. So we talked about the possibility of migrating our HR system to the cloud after we had done our ERP review. We took it to RFP, and we got responses from all the big vendors. It would have been Oracle, it would have been Workday. We got a reply back from them, and based on the report the bids that came in, we made the determination that it wasn't in our best interest to move off of where we currently are. We're on an on-premise solution, and it was rational for us to stay there, especially since we have finance, HR, and student all in one suite, a PeopleSoft suite. So when we looked at that, we passed on the opportunity and simply did an upgrade of HR. Those systems that are in the cloud right now, in addition to O365, which is on its way, we have point solutions in a variety of different cloud offerings from AWS. Some of those are being used to offset the extremely high security requirements associated with some classified research. So we're using GovCloud from Amazon for some of those point solutions, but we haven't made a massive move to that because frankly, we can do it cheaper than we can get it from the cloud. And we can also avoid vendor lock and give us some flexibility on decision-making going forward.
What percent would you say is in the cloud total? Obviously, you got a lot of.
Yeah, we have learning management systems in the cloud. All of those retention initiative projects, all of those are hosted. Those are cloud-based. So all the college source stuff, the core enterprise is still primarily on site, but the niche applications are increasingly in the cloud. And we are constantly looking at opportunities to do that. We've developed a great deal of expertise in that space and can actually do costing. And at this point, there is a great deal, we're right in the center of where our peers are in terms of the decision to go there or not. And we have an inflection point here with these new deployments that we'll have to make where that'll have to continue to be evaluated.
Thank you very much.
Hi,
Yes.
Gary.
Go ahead.
I would more of a comment. Thank you for this presentation. Again, pointing out this map of internet accessibility across the state. I just sort of want to use this time as a possible PR opportunity. There was a recent article in the Wall Street Journal written on the 16th that highlighted Missouri and its lack of internet accessibility.
Was.
And I think with Suzette and her team and you and your IT and Marshall, there's potentially a great opportunity here to respond to the journal and say, hey, wait a minute here, we're really doing some great things. So I would just encourage us to look at this recent article and make a proactive response that as a university, we're really on top of making our state more accessible.
Okay, will do.
Thank you for the presentation. You've mentioned expanding, broadband access throughout the state, correct?
I'm sorry, the first.
You've mentioned expanding internet
Right.
access throughout the state.
Right. Not us as the university, but us in partnership with others in the state that can take the lead on that and drive it as an agenda. And it's
Okay.
clearly important for higher education in the sense that it's outreach to the K-12s, it's healthcare, it's business, it's everything.
I understand. I want to know the total cost of this and how our partners are going to, share in the cost of that, or if we're going to be, paying anything for it. So what are the costs of this expansion?
It's unknown at this time. That's actually subject to a more detailed assessment of our current state of internet availability. And this alumni that was mentioned earlier from an engineering firm has actually offered to help offset the cost of doing that assessment. The money that would be required ultimately is going to be dependent upon that specific census assessment, and it will depend upon things like the terrain, the proximity to existing fiber access in some parts of the state. So that would be the part that would go forward after a commitment was made to pursue this, and obviously contingent upon how much matching funds might be available from the federal government.
But we have no idea how much, at this point, we have no idea how much this would cost.
No,
Okay.
but it would probably be a number in the billions to adequately satisfy all of the underserved areas in the state.
Darrell, let me mention that we have had a couple of discussions in Kansas City about this, and at least some numbers have been thrown out, which may not be valid, but at least they were talking somewhere in the $300 to $500 million range. So it's a big number, but the assessment, like he says, will be done, and we'll have a better idea of what it is.
And do we have any idea of what the ask would be from the university at this point?
That has not even been discussed.
Okay.
We're a willing partner, and Mornet is at the table along with the extension, but there has not been any details yet in terms, we're far too early in the process to start thinking about how we're going to split up budgets.
And Darrell's asked important questions on the cost, but some of it's dependent on federal funds, which
Yes.
are available. Back to Jamie's point, Missouri is known as a broadband desert at this point. I mean, seriously, that's what we're being called because we're so far behind. I really want to commend you for joining with Governor Greitens' task force and the symposium that you're going to be at the table, as I understand it.
We're going to continue to be active in that. We have reached out, or not we necessarily, but we have been in contact with and have facilitated interactions between the working group that's putting this together and Senator Blunt's office, who is also a key player in terms of the federal legislation that would be behind this effort if it did come to a distribution of federal funding.
So this would be potentially huge for lots of reasons, but for us in higher education, to making available in outstate Missouri where it isn't currently available, our online programming and
Correct.
continuing education. Am I correct about that?
That is correct.
And you've put up, and I don't know all the acronyms, you're granular, but obviously you've been laying all the groundwork to take advantage of that.
Yes.
Have we primed the faculty? We know that broadband will be increased. The
Right.
question is, do we get the whole state, which is what we hope for?
We
Have we
are-
primed the faculty to take advantage of it? And let's say it increases in the near term, are we ready? President Choi was talking about having seamless so that you could be registered in SS&T and take courses in KC because you can't, part of the graduation rate is they can't get courses scheduled.
Right.
But are we close to being ready so that when that broadband coverage expands, that we'll be able to take advantage of it?
It is part of the planning that is part of the strategic initiatives that have been identified by President Choi and the other general officers. So the reason we've done this evaluation on the student system is to determine what the impediments are to that seamless type of online access and enrollment. I think the faculty are ready. Jim Spain, Vice Provost for Undergraduate Studies and Online here at Mizzou, has a cadre of very experienced and energetic faculty who are always ready to find more students in that regard. So I think we are ready in that space.
Pretty exciting, thank you.
Well, and one other thing I'll mention, just we're not in the K-12 business, but we are floating initiatives proposals that have come from Mornet through the K-12 online that Mizzou operates for opportunities to extend the reach, if you will, of the university and provide access not just to the higher education, but to the K-12 opportunities that we also can offer. Curator Stillman.
I don't want to be totally sanguine about this, making it seamless, though, because I have had, and John has been agitating on this before I came along, on the fact that we should have one common portal and online classes should be uniform among the campuses. And I think it's good to say we're going to be doing it, but there has been not just a little resistance in pockets to that. And everybody wants to know where their turf is going. I've been approached over the years by people telling me we shouldn't do this, it'll restrict innovation. And so I think we all need to keep in mind that this will take considerable effort, even pressure, to make something happen that frankly should have happened several years ago. Now, I do think that one of the advantages we have is not just Dr. Choi, but I talked to incoming Chancellor Cartwright about this at length, who actually has the experience of making this happen. System. Yes, and so, and they did that at his present system. But that is, if we just think this is easy, it's not easy, and you know that. There is going to be pushback, and there are going to be recalcitrant people, and there are going to be people digging their heels in, and it has to be overcome.
It has been difficult. It will not be easy going forward, but there are ways, and we've been able to have some successes in spaces where we have been able to assure the campuses. We have to understand that the campuses represent a tribe, our family, and they need to retain that. That's what the university is, not just a bunch of buildings and equipment. It's a people that make that university happen. Whenever we can provide services that integrates those groups across seamlessly without endangering their identity or their feeling of self-worth, we can be successful. And this is just another one of those examples where that will happen.
Gary's going to be around during a break, so we need maybe another couple of questions, and we'll stay on our agenda.
Marcy? I have one. Let me ask this question real quickly about two-factor authentication.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned the password PIN number.
Yes.
Is that it?
That's it.
As I understand it, two-factor authentication, that's not very secure in light of what's really talked about two-factor. Is that right?
No, sir, that's not
true?
right. It is a real-time, the second factor is delivered to you in real time at the time that you are trying to log into the system. And it's a temporary PIN number that will only persist for about 30 seconds. It is accepted as a secure means. Now, you can argue that there's scarcely anything that is truly secure from all potential intrusions, but this is state-of-the-art for right now in terms of what we're doing and in common practice on our peer institutions.
Here's my question. I know that at MKC, a technology and a company was developed, iVerify.
That's correct.
Was anything looked into trying to include that in all of the university system?
We have not explored that deeply because it is a relatively new technology, but it also brings us to another point of liability in the sense that to use that, we would be storing biometric data, and we are not anxious to be getting additional personal information in the data stores associated with the university. It will have applications in the foreseeable future, I have no doubt, but it wasn't cost effective for us to look at that for the current rollout that
I
we're
was
with.
just thinking that, UMKC, of course, owns part of that, as I
Yes.
understand it, and has revenue coming in on a yearly basis. The more people that are added to that network, the more money the
Yes, sir.
university system makes.
Yes, sir.
And so, anyway, it's just a thought.
Well, I just want to be sure, because I think Jamie had a great idea to, we need to get this message out, but at the same time, I want it to be credible. And if we're looking at $1 billion project that we can't afford to partner in or be involved in the future, I just want to be sure of what we're putting out, because I think there's a credibility issue. It's great to be aspirational, but at the same time, given the budget situation and our financial situation, we just got to be careful about the promises that we make. That's all.
Agreed entirely, and that is actually the purpose of the stakeholder meeting, to determine what is actually feasible, and
Okay.
that will be contingent upon what the Fed does and a number of other factors that are yet to be determined.
Okay.
Jeff?
Yes, sir.
I want to second what Curator Steelman said, because I do believe that the online portal, one, is critical, but obviously I don't want the various universities to lose their identity, and I think there's a way to do it. But my question is, you're obviously over all the IT. How, are there legacy systems at the other campuses that aren't underneath you, or do you have it all?
There are campus-specific systems in place at all campuses. Campuses have not evolved along a common evolution over the last 50 years as they've come along. We are increasingly and consistently migrating and converging those together as opportunities as we go forward. So there's more of that to do, but we are not yet all on a single platform for all services that are offered.
And I would, obviously, anytime that decision is made to do anything, it would be to relate, to simplify, join one platform.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Gary, thank you very much. You can tell there's a lot of interest in this, and we appreciate your materials and your answers. Next is the critical issues portion of our meeting, and this is a time, I'm going to call Dr. Steve Graham, who will introduce the participants here, but this is a time when we address issues important to the university and important to the board, and it is a time when we invite participation by the general officers, the chancellors, the provost, and of course board discussion and questions. So Dr. Graham, we're going to turn it over to you.
Excellent. Today we're going to talk about experiential learning, and I think the beauty of this is that a lot of times when people, particularly the public, think of the university classroom, they think of the large lecture hall or even the small seminar where faculty are working directly with students. And there is so much that happens outside of the classroom, absolutely interesting projects where learning occurs that supports the knowledge and conceptual understanding of students and helps them with real world problems. So that's really what we're going to focus on today. Let's see if okay, it's working. One of the things that, that we know is that students that are engaged are more likely to be motivated students, they're more likely to get more out of their classrooms, they're more likely to stay. And one of the finest researchers in the field is George Koo. You may know him through the NSSE, what's called the National Study of Student Engagement. He's probably one of the most prominent scholars in the field. And I use this quote because I think it captures the essence of what we're trying to talk about today. George and his colleagues did a number of studies, and they looked at deep learning within different institutions and where was it happening, what caused it to happen. They did hundreds of interviews with different kinds of students. Oh, great. So, huh? Okay. Hundreds of interviews with different students to find out what deep learning, and at the end of large studies, basically what George said, he said, I now have something that I can tell people when they ask me, how do we increase student engagement and student success, and that every student participate in at least 2 highly engaged activities during their undergraduate. Now keep in mind, it's not only something that we do at the end, which is sort of the capstone or the projects that seniors do, but to get students engaged early, okay? So one of the questions that comes up, why would we do this? Because obviously this takes a lot of energy and talent on the part of the faculty. It takes connections with the community. One of the things that we hear, and this is from a national study from the National Association of Colleges and Employers, NACE is probably the best known group that deals with students and their employment after graduation. Study after study will tell us what employers ask for all the time that they sometimes don't feel they get. They get the engineers with the expertise, they get the biologists or even the history graduates that know the material. But what they say is that we need students that can think critically, that can have great oral and written communication. They have to work in teams. They need to be digitally literate. There's 8 different criteria that, or skills, leadership, professional work ethic, career management, global and intellectual, being able to work in a pluralistic environment and stuff. So those are the kinds of things. This is right off of their research that talks about the kinds of outcomes that they're looking for. So a lot of times they'll say, the students that you send us, they know the basic, they know the content, but they don't know how to do these critical things that are so essential in the workplace. So that's why one of the reasons that we engage in these kinds of faculty-intensive experiences for students. So there's some examples. Why is experiential learning important? It really touches on the things that I talked about. It teaches students the competence they need for real-world success, prepares them for a career. There's always that gap between what they know and how to use it, how to do something with it, okay? And so it's called declarative knowledge versus procedural knowledge. All of you, particularly those of you that are in the courtroom or in the business setting, you know that there's a lot that it takes even the brightest new graduates to learn that in terms of how to implement what they know, okay? And it also motivates students to stay engaged. Now, the other thing that we know is that just experience itself doesn't do it. Okay? A lot of the things that you know as a professional, as someone that's worked in the field for a long time, is that you get something and it makes you change the way you think about the world and it helps you do stuff better in the future. Students have been in school most of their lives and they don't really understand, so they need an active engagement with faculty. Kolb is another one of the researchers that talks about this, and he sort of maps out a plan, and I won't go through it in detail, but it's basically you have that concrete experience, you have some reflection on it, where you sit and work with the faculty, or maybe you work with a group of students in part of a seminar, and then you really think about what you learned, and you relate it to what you already know, okay? And then you try to get some kind of abstract general principle out of it, you throw it back into the workplace and see, hey, does that theory really make sense, or do I have to adapt it? All of us know all the practices that we've learned have to be adjusted for real life, okay? So what does experiential learning look like? And so today we have a panel of, I think, excellent experts from our campus that I think will be able to elaborate on this a lot and put some real examples and stories in front of you. So we're doing a very short presentation because I love the questions that you guys have, and we wanted to make sure we left plenty of time for questions. So, but just to kind of seed your thinking, all of these kinds of things are experiential learning. It's not just the co-op experience that the engineers do. It's not just the study abroad, but it's many opportunities that you can see, whether it's field work, sometimes it's leadership opportunities that take place outside the classroom that aren't credit-bearing. We know of all the different kinds of what I like refer to what they do down at Missouri S&T as sort of brain sports that they're engaged with. And so you can see the whole array of things that provide examples. So what I'm going to do is just ask one of our panel members, Jeff Caulfield from S&T, to talk a little bit about what they're doing to make sure that this happens on their campus. Once again, we're only going to be up here about 10 or 15 minutes, and then we're going to have a lot of time for you to engage with the panel members. So here you go, Jeff, and we're working off a handheld mic.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, Steve. First of all, on behalf of the four of us on the panel and Steve, I want to thank the board and the general officers for their interest in this really wonderful topic. Steve asked me to just do a brief, and it will be very brief, presentation about what we're doing at S&T because recently we adopted a graduation requirement for every one of our undergraduates so that as of the fall 15 cohort of entering freshmen who are now nominally sophomores, juniors, the more overachievers of them are actually seniors now, they have to have a significant experiential learning activity completed before they can graduate. And that was part of our strategic plan, developed about 2012 or so. And so about 5 years ago, we embarked on this strategic plan, the very first lever of which was to require this requirement. Why? Well, because we knew it was important. We estimated about probably 60% of our students already did a significant experiential learning activity before they graduated, but we knew there were 30%, 35% who never really got engaged on our campus. And so we thought it was important enough to require it. And amazingly, this was sort of an all hands on deck, everybody on board approach. The faculty thought it was a good idea, the staff thought it was a good idea, leadership thought it was a good idea. And within a very short time, we engaged all of the constituents. Faculty Senate came up with their document guiding the principals, and it's now part of our graduation requirements. It's in our catalog, it's in every curriculum. We also decided to make it our quality initiative for the Higher Learning Commission. Higher Learning Commission accredits all of our campuses. It's the Midwestern Accreditation Group, and they require a, let's call it an outside-the-box, innovative sort of initiative that you embark on during your cycle. We decided this would be our outside-the-box initiative, and we're well on our way. We don't have it down perfectly yet, but we're working on it, and we're getting there. It will actually be reviewed at the end of this year by Higher Learning Commission. So don't want to go through all these bullets. We want to leave plenty of time for you to ask questions of all 4 campuses. But these are some excerpts from our document guiding our experiential learning. The key here was that faculty wanted to retain control of their curriculum, which of course is a long-time tradition in higher education. And so we could not, as leaders, we could not define what experiential learning was for them. Each individual department defines what they will accept. But there are some general principles, and you can read through here that it has to be university sponsored or affiliated. They have to get some upfront approval. There needs to be learning by doing, and they're very important. For experiential learning to be really meaningful, there has to be a written reflection piece of substance. Without that, as the Kolb theory showed, and as everybody knows from experience, it doesn't really hold as much weight. And so we proposed a experiential learning sort of document that the students can use with their advisor. You can see up there, well, maybe you can't see, it's kind of a small slide, but you can see up there the sort of experiential learning activities that we think should apply, but it's up to each individual faculty group in each individual degree program. But it's very typical. Study abroad would typically apply, co-ops, internships, student design teams, very important on our campus. Many of our students involved with student design teams, mentoring, service learning, and all 4 campuses. It was thrilling for me, Steve, to get together with my 3 colleagues who will be coming up here shortly and to hear about all the interesting and innovative things I thought I knew about experiential learning. But when we were doing this preparation for this, it was interesting to hear the really cool and innovative things coming out of all 4 campuses. And so with that, I think I'll turn it back over to Steve, and we can field your questions and have a discussion.
Thank you. So we asked someone from each campus who really digs deep into this, is involved. So we've got Jim Spain, who many of you know, the Vice Provost for Undergraduate Studies. Freudian slip there, Jim, sorry. Kim McNeely, who's the Associate Vice President for the University College and Undergraduate Advising. Andy Goodman, Associate Vice President for Professional Development, and of course Jeff, who you just talked to, Vice Provost for Undergraduate Studies. All of these people are very experienced, and they've got lots of really good information and stories to share. So what we'd like to do is encourage you. We have some questions if you don't, to prime the pump, but please engage these people, ask them, why do we do this? How do the faculty get engaged? What are the learning outcomes that result from them? Take it away, and we'll let them get started.
Let me ask the first question. Where do we stand, or where do we rate in experiential learning on our campuses? And then I realize we have different campuses here, and I know that, for instance, I know S&T has moved rather rapidly recently in that area, but we read about other campuses that are heavily involved in this learning of the future idea. Where do we stand? Rate, how are we doing?
I think one way to answer that question is with the Carnegie classification for civic engagement. It's probably not a total answer, but a number of our campuses do have a classification for civic engagement. Missoula is one of those. That means that our students are, a large portion of our students are engaged in the community at our campus, mostly through service learning experiences, but a number of them. So,
And how close are we to our aspirational goals? How close are we?
we think that over 75% of our students are engaged in the community at some point throughout their career. And our goal is in that area, so 75 to 80% of our students engaged.
So, Dr. Spain, did you want to chime in?
No, go ahead.
So the
Curator
ultimate
Chapman.
goal of the ultimate goal of experiential learning is, I understand, is give the kids an experience and a real world experience, right? Or one of the goals. Can you tell me how much of our experiential learning on each campus has translated into a job, has built a connection from those kids with industry, during that process that has ended up in a job? And how are we working on each campus to develop those pipelines to industry through experiential learning?
I'm going to back up to Curator Graham's. We're top 100 universities as far as sending students abroad. We're on the Presidential Honor Roll for community engagement and service learning. We consistently have one of our undergraduate students selected as one of 60 in the nation to present their undergraduate research in Washington, D.C. at Posters on the Hill. So using those as benchmarks, we feel like our campus, our faculty, and indeed our students, they're the ones that get the credit because they're the ones that actually look for opportunities to become engaged and be involved. To speak to Curator Chapman's point, I think we can all do a much better job of tying those experiences to specific outcomes. And so there's two directions that I think will help us get there. First off, our placement assessments. And so for the first time this year at Mizzou, our campus-wide, we have gone to a single platform where we're asking students to tell us, do you have a job? Where are you going? What are you doing? As part of that, they have to authenticate into the system. So now I can tie that to that student academic record. And this will be a first opportunity for us to be able to do that. And that's going to allow us to do the kind of assessments that Curator Chapman is asking, are we doing that? We'll be able to do that very intentionally. The second piece, and we expect to report by the end of the summer on an extended transcript. So for example, some things a student may do as an undergraduate research project, but they're not getting academic credit for it, but it's not also then part of their academic record. And so we want to extend the transcript, which is very early in discussion across higher ed, to make that part of their academic record. The other thing President Choi is asked Mizzou to look at integrating academic and student affairs. Because, for example, our alternative breaks program, we're one of the largest, we're probably the largest program in the country where students go out across the state. In fact, we send some international, 22 states last spring. Instead of going on spring break, they go to 22 different states. We even send a couple of missionary groups over to Kansas just to be good neighbors. That's for you, Curator Phillips.
Learn to speak the language, all right?
But they have tremendous experiential, transformative experiences, but that's not tied back to their academic record. And so we're going to take the opportunity to integrate academic affairs and student affairs in response to President Choi's challenge to us, really, to do that intentionally. I think there's great opportunities. Student leaders, MSA president, that's not going to be on Nathan's record anywhere. It'll be on his resume, but it won't be on his academic record. Even our part-time jobs on campus, where students are spending 15 or 20 hours working in a part-time job. We need to, as a campus, embrace that as part of their learning experience. I got a guy right here that milked cows in the environmental chamber for me as an undergraduate student. And I will say that experience probably was one of the more formative experiences that he had. and got him the heck out of dairy nutrition and into law.
Sure.
So I will add that, I just want to say this, if you don't mind, Dr. Spain was my advisor. He's one of the most fantastic people you're ever going to meet, so I just want to throw that out.
I did think the reversal of roles was interesting a while ago because you used to defer to him. A while ago, he deferred to you. So that's a real change.
And look at this. I deferred to him even when he was working for me already.
Go ahead. Kim?
I'd like to just go back to what that gold standard is. And if we take the work that's informed by one of the slides, George Koo, is the idea that our students should have an early experiential opportunity that can help them clarify goals and a realistic reason for all of the academic work that we put in front of them, and then that more signature experience at the end. And so if that's the gold standard, I think each of our campuses are setting in place ways to meet that, but each of our individual academic units varies greatly in that. And so, for example, if you look at our conservatory, that culminating experience as real-life performance is absolutely invested in their curriculum, just like teacher ed. As we look at, and Chancellor Morton has taken the lead on that, in some of our academic units, for example, the College of Arts and Sciences, we need to work a bit harder with establishing greater partners in our community to increase those internship connections for them to make that easier. But one of the things that we also need to do as far as retention is to really invest some time in experiential learning early on. Some of the things that we've done at UMKC have to do with our Eureka courses that we've established. Frankly, from strategic money that was offered to us to change that student's experience early. An example of that was our biology students take a mathematics course that might be seen as pretty dry in some ways. Changing that into an experiential learning opportunity, that instructor partnered with KC, particularly the folks that were trying to understand water and how the situation where our Blue River is incredibly polluted, and we needed to change that from a biological perspective. That seemed to be a clear of course, but when we found out what happened about how the federal mandate make sure that we changed our sewers, which then increased the water cost in some of our most economically deprived areas, and then that created a new whole host of issues related to health. It was amazing to watch those students see how a mathematics course could really inform and help them realize a new tool to either address social justice issues for some of those students, but also clear expectations about this mathematics tool and the power of decision making with that. So early curriculum at the 1 and 200 level is as important.
I'd like to pick up on what Kim has said and give another example of that, and then get to the question of the costs of experiential learning as opposed to standard didactic teaching as opposed to online learning eventually.
Absolutely.
When it becomes more cost effective. So my example is also UMKC, where many people know that there's a 6-year program. And so you take kids straight out of high school. And so I had an experience, which I think will be helpful in making your point, where I had to take my wife for an emergency situation to a partner, not a hospital, because we don't have a hospital that we own in Kansas City. I had to take her to an emergency room and got actually the head of the emergency room, and there was a young woman in there. This was in October, so school had started 2 months in. And so we asked who she was, thinking she was a resident. She was pretty young. Turns out she was a first-year student.
Absolutely.
A first-year student in the emergency room being mentored by the head of the emergency department while she's taking the basic sciences because she's straight out of high school. UMKC doesn't have the research, and never will, that the MU school does. But what they do is they end up with products after 6 years, so that's a year less of paying tuition, than the normal medical school. And so many of them end up in leadership positions in hospitals and institutions. There's a whole list of unusual promotions of that kind of experiential learning. It doesn't cost very much because it was a partner. It wasn't a teacher that had to do that mentoring. Is it possible for us to lessen the classroom experience and put it into experiential learning by partnering? S&T actually does that to some degree. In Raleigh, you don't have that many partnering experiences, but when I went on for the indoctrination at S&T, I knew it was a jewel. We spent
Orientation.
Orientation. I came away there understanding how important experiential learning is to that campus. It's costly because you don't have as many opportunities, but you're creating it and you have partnerships. So how do we do that in other areas where there are partnerships that are available, and maybe even cutting down on the classroom time and even the years? And I'll give you another example. This is a long question, but it gets to the fundamental question about experiential learning is great, but how do we afford it? Is that a fair question to end up with? So last night I was sitting next to Michelle Arnapol Cecil, who's the ranking professor at the law school, and she was dreaming about having a 5-year path to becoming a lawyer, 3 years of undergraduate, 2 years of law school. I think she didn't say it, but maybe a degree after 5 years. Used to be 6, and now it's 7. And then having an apprenticeship. An apprenticeship wouldn't necessarily, right now they have clinics as part of a 3-year program, but you could do apprenticeships and cut down maybe 2 years of, we don't need more lawyers, at least on the board. But you see, my point is there are ways to do experiential learning, whether it's within the degree or outside of the degree, by partnering. So how do you see this occurring? And am I correct that it's a little expensive to have a professor always being the person that's sitting with a team of 3 people after hours? That's the question. How do we make it economical?
I think I'll respond quickly, and then I'll let Dr. Spain have some numbers about economic benefits as well that accrue when we do experiential learning. But at S&T, I guess the classic example of a really good partnership that doesn't really cost us anything is a co-op. And a lot of our STEM students will spend a semester, maybe 2, maybe 3, at Boeing, alternating back and forth. They actually get paid to go there. There is a cost, and the cost would be maybe they're not going to graduate quite as fast, although usually these are really good students and they probably do graduate after 4.5 years, even with the co-op. But that's an example of one that's not very costly. And that doesn't involve professors. That involves real world working as an intern, whatever, as an engineer with, say, Boeing, Emerson Electric, Black & Veatch, other examples. Other experiential learning is very costly. Our Engineers Without Borders team, they're going on international trips. Now, they raise a lot of their own money, they get a lot of donations, they work off of endowments, but those are expensive trips. When you take 10 kids to Bolivia and you spend 3 or 4 weeks there and you're building a water supply system, it's a fantastic experience, but yeah, that's pretty costly, and we send faculty and staff. So it varies, but there are benefits that accrue, and I think, Jim, you've got some numbers about that.
So thanks, Jeff. Our Office of Service Learning, and Dr. Anne Marie Foley, who's the founding director of that over 25 years ago, it actually started in the Honors College and was spun off, if you will. We have over 4,700 students annually that do over 230,000 hours of community service. That's not limited to Columbia. That includes our state government interns down in Jefferson City, and we'll place about 80 students down there. We send a smaller cadre over to Washington, D.C. in the fall and spring. At $22 an hour, which is the national average, that's over $5 million of volunteer work that our undergraduate students do. And that's Sometimes it's associated with a class, for example, in my home department, animal science, companion animals. They have to, it's a service learning course, and they very well may spend a fair bit of their week out at the Humane Society. But then they bring that experience back and apply it to the conversation they're having in the classroom. Our summer interns, our College of Business, Parks, Recreation, and Tourism is two examples require internships for graduation. And so they work really hard to establish relationships with businesses. But when those students are out all over the country, they're enrolled in an online internship course so that we intentionally have that reflective piece that we were talking about as being so important. To, you know, there's an experience, and then there's learning from the experience. And that engagement with faculty and staff is really important to that engagement experience. This summer, Mike Alden, who is also here, and Anne Marie are leading a trip to Vietnam, where they're going to be working with a project that's being supported by Nike, I think. Mr. Alden, is that right? So there are partnerships like that that can also bring, I think we've been able to raise over $25,000 to help us make those kinds of experiences that Jeff was talking about more affordable. So distributing the learning and involving mentors and experts in those spaces really add an important value, and it does distribute the learning and the work.
One of the other pieces I might just quickly have Kim touch on it is a lot of times it's not just a real small group working with the faculty member, but it's part of a class project. So Kim, you might talk about sort of the classes that go out and actually give free service to a particular civic group or business to do. So the students are doing it on their own as a project, but it's a real live thing as opposed to a case study they'd see in a book or a video or something.
Sure, absolutely. The example that I was talking about before is certainly a partnership, yes, with the Kansas City Public Works. And so their question back to this particular faculty member is, how do we evaluate the actions that we've taken to improve the quality of the Blue River and to improve our neighborhoods? Was this the right direction to go? So the issue is that Kansas City Public Works then got free consultation that they could use to empower better decision-making moving forward. So that's an example. Other examples have to do with certainly our criminal justice program has an opportunity for students to go out in the juvenile justice program and provide mentorship opportunities for particularly young women that are in that system. That's a win for the juvenile justice system because they have additional folks that are there and available, because the mutual goal is to have that outcome for that adolescent in the system to be more positive. And certainly some of our criminal justice situations don't have the money to be able to provide one-on-one mentorship. So again, it's an example of linking needs of both partners to have a win for both sides that, most importantly from the university point of view, allows that student to see, have an experience that helps them say, boy, this is exactly on track. And the one part that sometimes you all don't get to see is the change in that student's demeanor, their body language, their approach to the rest of the courses that they may not have seen a reason for. Once they've come back to one of these experiences that is absolutely linked, we get a win-win on all sides of that. So those are a couple. I could go on with more examples, but those are two very different.
General, how many first-year students have this early experience? What percentage?
Not enough, and so so very sorry. Was that too frank? No. Oh, okay, sorry.
Here's my question. If we made an effort to have those first-year students have that experience, would it help them in solidifying what their major is and what they're going to do? Because the farther you go along before you switch majors,
absolutely,
then you're running into the 5-year, 6-year syndrome.
Absolutely.
If we had the learning experience early, some of those, I don't know what percentage, somebody could figure that out. Some of those people would make a quick decision that this is not the field they want to be in, and they would make the switch. I'll give my example. 2 years, took all the engineering courses, every single one of them, got into my 3rd year, 5 weeks in, decided, I don't want to be an engineer. And I literally moved everything into arts and science. Well, it took me 4.5 years to graduate, but I had like 150 hours. But I think, I think that it might shorten this time period where students graduate, which would be a great help to all the system.
Absolutely.
And I actually think you see that a lot in the professional programs, like in education, they got them out the very first year or two. In nursing, they're out. In journalism. So for those kids that have an idea of what they might want to do, you're exactly right. They found that early experience, get them out, let them taste it, see if they like it, because nobody wants to go through 2 years of engineering courses only to switch to political science. Right, Jeff? Okay. I think one of the things, too, the fact that S&T is actually requiring this of every single student is really a big step. I think that's pretty cool.
It is, but we have to be sensitive to, when I'm advising freshmen, I always advise them, get involved with one thing or two things outside of academics, not 3 or 4 or 5 things. So we have to be sensitive, or 10 things, the overachievers. Because it's a transition, and so the academics have to come first. That first calculus class or that first English comp class, whichever happens to be the hardest for you, that first chemistry class. So if we get them too involved in student design teams, we have to be really careful on our campus that they don't just come in and say, oh my God, I want to spend 50 hours a week on the robotics team. That's not going to work. And so we do have to be sensitive in that first year experience that it's appropriate, that it doesn't take up too much time, but that it gets them exposed. Absolutely spot on.
Jeff, if I could ask you though, and I could be wrong on this, my observation of the student design teams, we were talking about expense, is that those are almost as popular with faculty and staff as they are with students. And in fact, and I don't think faculty gets enough credit for this.
Oh, you're right.
Is that they volunteer hours and hours of time. But that is the other thing about a well-run experiential learning, and I don't think there's any better than the design team. It lowers its expense because it becomes so popular among all levels that people want to participate.
Yeah, it's something we struggle with. The design team mechanisms, we're working on them all the time, because faculty, if you're going to be a faculty advisor for the Mars rover team, that's a lot of work. And there's no extra compensation. So.
But I find they really gravitate to
Oh
it.
yeah, they love doing it. They love doing it. We need to find ways to reward our faculty, even if it's intrinsic rewards and nothing direct. And we try to do as much of that as we can. But you're right, it's a pleasure to work with those students. It really is.
But I wanted to say that to give faculty the credit that they deserve.
Thank you very much.
For how they participate and the lengths they go to participate.
Yeah.
I noticed Jim Neiman came to listen in. He was one of our award winners last evening, the last one for the Entrepreneur Award. And I'm going to reference him to make this point. So he's leveraging his time. He's a non-tenured track faculty at the law school. And he is reaching out to other campuses and to law firms like mine and other law firms to leverage his time to draw mentors in to help law students help entrepreneurs, many of whom are students, right? So my encouragement to you and to those that are listening is when you have a good program, share it with the other campuses.
Absolutely.
And they can replicate, they can learn from how you're doing it. Great ideas today.
Absolutely. Could I just,
No, please, go ahead.
because I'm under a bit of duress, I need to just share this very quickly. You brought up the entrepreneur world, and that certainly is at the heart of the UMKC campus. And one of the most amazing experiential learning activities, programs that we have, where we call them incubators. That was actually it was coded hatchery at the beginning, but these are essentially venture incubators. And as I touched base with the faculty and some of the students that were involved in that, I was not completely certain that they would not be climbing in my trunk and coming to see you today, but they did want me to give you examples of possible ventures that you might want to get involved in, everything ranging from nonprofits, an organization called By Grace, which teaches and got funding to be able to teach women in underserved countries to be able to make hand sewn clothing and at a profit, all the way to redesigns of crutches and those type of things. But I did promise that I would leave them here with you, and so I will meet that expectation. And with that, after the meeting, you have homework. So there you go.
Thank you. That's excellent. I believe one of the best experiential learning experiences is to get real-world experience by doing co-ops and internships. And co-ops and internships are not just relegated to the technology fields. There are some top universities like Drexel, Northeastern, RIT, and Cincinnati, where regardless of your major, you could be in finance or you could be in the School of Social Work, that experiential learning experience comes through co-op.
Mm-hmm.
But the beauty of their programs is that they provide courses that are available even when students take off a term to do that extended co-op. So when they come back for the spring term or the fall term, they don't have to wait another year to take the courses that they need.
Absolutely.
And this is why I think having more collaborations through distance learning and the seamless enrollment across the campuses will make a lot of sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. Okay. One of the other things too, in terms of cost, that I really have to give a shout out for, absolutely, a shout out for faculty is when you talk about the cost, I really think in many respects, and please keep me honest, the cost is to the faculty member. Because what they do is they get engaged with the students, they send them out on a project, they're out and they have to set this up so that they can work with a partner. And I know we do that in journalism. In fact, Suzette used to do this all the time, where they would take a project and work it for a whole year for a company. And so that one of the costs is to the faculty members, and I think we have to rethink or adjust our thinking about what faculty get credit for and how we honor that through the tenure promotion process or through, all kinds of things. And so, I could go on for hours, but faculty really do a lot of things that are sort of hidden from and don't show up on the credit hour count and things like that.
That's what I was trying to say, but you did a lot better job.
And it would be hard, we'd be hard pressed to find an academic program on our campus, and I think I'm safe to say on any of our campuses, where faculty aren't involved and students don't have that kind of opportunity. The challenge is, how do we scale it so that all students, but drill it into the curriculum so that it's an intentional. It's not just a all gee whiz experience. I go study abroad and I come back and I had a really nice trip, but it wasn't a meaningful learning experience. I'll share.
And you know what, because we got the 5-minute code from President Choi, so I want at least 2 or 3 of them to share. I said, bring a story that will show the power of this experience. And so I know Kim, everybody's got one. Jim, you start, but or
so one of the obvious stories is this young man right here, right? But early in my career, I went home to see my family in North Carolina, and we had a student who was interning at Murphy Family Farms in Rose Hill, North Carolina. And I decided I was only an hour and a half. It was from my in-laws. A good break from my in-laws seemed to be a welcome sort of break. And I went over, and her name was Carrie. And I met Carrie in the gravel parking lot of Murphy Family Farms as we arrived there together, and she got out, and we were going in to see her supervisor and then have lunch. And I said, Carrie, that day happened to be her last day. I said, Carrie, what's the most important thing that you've learned? And she said, Dr. Spain, I've learned that I can be 1,000 miles from home on my own and be successful. So there are some intrinsic qualitative impacts that are hard for us to measure, but as Kim mentioned, they have a different presence, they have a different feel, they have a different confidence. And in and of itself, that can be the difference in taking a student from being successful to wildly successful after they leave our university. And so that's part of the benefit of this, that sometimes it's hard for us to capture in numbers and to show relationships. But when students come back from working in True North on a service learning project and counseling women and children who've been in abusive relationships, that changes them. That changes them.
I always like to close with Jim, but I'm going to ask Andy for, because Jim's such a closer, you know. But Andy has a great story that I think talks about learning and the tools. It's really a great story.
And to play off of what you were mentioning before, faculty spend much more time than beyond the semester, especially when they're involved in experiential learning. There is an approach to learning, a pedagogy called team-based learning, where students work individually on things, but also primarily within teams throughout an entire semester. One of the activities is team-based testing. So that's where they take an exam individually, and then they immediately take the exact same exam as a team. And if they get the answer right, there's this great card called an IF-AT, immediate feedback assessment technique. Looks a lot like a lottery ticket, so you scratch it off. If there's a star under the letter that you scratched off, then you got the answer correct and you move on to the next one. But the real learning happens if you don't get the answer correct on the first time. As a team, you have to talk about why that answer was wrong and what the correct answer would be. The cards are expensive. So for a class, it might cost about $100 per semester per course. This is a fairly widely used technique on our campus, so the cost then becomes expensive. We have an IS, information systems course that in one semester works on Android apps, and then the next semester works on Apple apps. This particular course decided this year to build that same type of IF-AT test, but to do it as an app that students could put on their phones. This would be free, if this is free to the students and to the instructor. There's also a way to download all of that information directly into our LMS, our learning management system, so that the instructor doesn't have to physically input those grades. The course ended in May, of course, just because of the spring semester, but the app was not quite ready. So they have been continuing to work, both the faculty member and the students, throughout the last 6 weeks. The big reveal is coming up next week. Their intent is to make this open resource. So after we make sure all of the bugs are cleared out on our campus, we'll be sharing it with the other campuses. And then once we're certain that that works, we'll be sharing it with the nation. Next semester, they move on to an Apple app.
Okay. And with that, I think we're closed with this session. I want to thank my panelists. These guys.
Venture opportunities right here for you. Yeah.
Kim was afraid to go home if she didn't get those out.
We're going to make sure they're passed out, Kim. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Here's, I think that mic is a little. That was not working so well.
It wasn't working?
Next item on the, and we'll move to the general business item, then we'll go back to the consent agenda. But the next item I'm going to ask Dr. Choi to introduce, and that has to do with an action in connection with an honorary degree that was issued a few years ago. Dr. Choi.
Thank you. Chairman Graham, thank you very much. As of this matter, I'll share with you some of the background information. I can't hear.
There you go. That's good.
So William H. Cosby Jr. was conferred an honorary degree by the University of Missouri-Columbia in 1999. based on the recommendation of the MU Faculty Council and the documented evidence concerning Mr. Cosby's conduct, I am recommending that the Board of Curators rescind the honorary degree conferred on Mr. Cosby. In 2015, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania filed criminal charges against Mr. Cosby, alleging that he used sedatives to allow him to have non-consensual sex with Miss Andrea Constant, a Temple employee, a Temple University employee. At the time, Mr. Cosby was a Temple University trustee. In 2016, the Pennsylvania court found probable cause that a crime had been committed and ordered the trial to go forward. The trial concluded on June 17, 2017, when the court declared a mistrial after the jury reported that it was deadlocked and could not reach unanimously and beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Cosby was guilty of the crime of aggravated indecent assault. The prosecution, though, has publicly stated that it will retry Mr. Cosby. During the trial, Mr. Cosby's testimony in a 2005 deposition in a civil case filed against him was read into evidence at that trial. In that deposition, Mr. Cosby acknowledged conduct, including the purchase of medication to give to women with whom he wanted to engage in sexual encounters. A second woman testified under oath at that trial that Mr. Cosby had had non-consensual sex with her, and law enforcement officials also testified at the prosecution. In addition to the allegations leading to the criminal charges, it has been reported that more than 50 women have accused Mr. Cosby of sexual assault. Universities' collective rules and regulations and honorary degrees provides the board with the express right to rescind an honorary degree upon recommendation of the faculty senate of the relevant campuses as well as the president. The evidence that was presented in the criminal trial documents activities by Mr. Cosby that are incompatible with the honor and the values previously granted to him by the University of Missouri in 1999. It is for these reasons that I recommend strongly that the Board of Curators rescind the honorary degree of Humane Letters conferred upon Mr. Cosby. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board rescind the honorary degree Doctor of Humane Letters conferred on William H. Cosby, Jr. on December 17, 1999.
Mr. Chairman, I second the motion.
We have a motion and a second that the honorary degree granted to William H. Cosby, Jr. be rescinded. Any discussion? There's no discussion. We'll have a vote. Cindy, would you call the roll?
Curator Chapman?
Yes.
Curator Farmer?
Yes.
Curator Graham?
Yes.
Curator Lehman?
Yes.
Curator Phillips?
Yes.
Curator Snowden?
Yes?
Curator Steelman?
Aye.
All votes in favor.
Thank you, Dr. Choi. And let's slip back now to the prior agenda item. That would be the consent agenda. We mentioned it but did not vote on that. That consent agenda appears on page 5, and there are 11 items on there. Do we have a motion?
Move approval.
Second?
Motion and second has been made to approve the consent agenda. Would you call the roll, Cindy?
Curator Chapman?
Yes.
Curator Farmer?
Yes.
Curator Graham?
Yes.
Curator Lehman?
Yes.
Curator Phillips?
Yes.
Curator Snowden?
Yes?
Curator Steelman?
Yes.
All votes in favor.
Before we go into executive session again, is there any matter that should be brought before the board under the good and welfare section of the board? Before we adjourn this meeting, I want to remind everyone of the importance of our retreat in July. Just a little bit of an update on the planning. a few days before the retreat, all of us will be receiving some study materials. I would urge all of us to study those materials carefully because it'll help maximize the benefit of the retreat. And each of the curators will be assigned as a somewhat of a facilitator or an assister to the moderator of the different subjects. So there may be areas in which each of us will be asked to bone up a little bit extra on so we can assist in that portion of the retreat. I think that covers everything that I wanted to mention at this point. We are going to form the committee, and Ryan Rapp will be contacting the members of the committee that have been set up to address and study the way we evaluate our capital projects, and we'll have that back for us to consider in September.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, we're waiting for President Choi to make a designation to that too, right?
Yeah, Dr. Choi is going to designate his delegate to serve on that, and Ryan's going to reach out to Dr. Choi on that probably over the weekend, I'm sure. I think that that's all I had in the way of announcements, except I have checked with a couple of the curators, and Curator Farmer and I had a discussion last week, and I think at the September meeting, we are going to experiment with a different configuration of the table that we meet at insofar as conducting our discussions as a board. We're going to go back to something that was done just for experiment several years ago, where we're a little bit across from each other, maybe closer, and even the presenters would be closer to us. And we still will accommodate those who are here so that they can listen and hear and participate. But we're going to try just a slightly different configuration. And Curator Farmer, I thank you for that suggestion. It was a good one.
We'll see how it works.
See how it
One more
works.
question. Will people actually get closer to me too? Am I included?
No,
No.
we, you've heard of special accommodations. We're arranging special accommodations for you, Curator Stillman. No, we all love you. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Cindy, would you call the roll?
Curator Chapman?
Yes.
Curator Farmer?
Yes.
Curator Graham?
Yes.
Curator Lehman?
Yes.
Curator Phillips?
Yes.
Curator Snowden?
Yes?
Curator Steelman?
Curator Stillman?
Yes.
All votes in favor.
Thank you. We will now go into an executive session. There'll be a little bit of time before we can start